Hi, I'm Jen Marlin. I'm a research scientist at the Yale School of the Environment, and I work with the Yale program on climate change communication. And today I'm going to talk with you about Americans' changing climate views before and during the age of COVID. So our organization, my organization, the YPCCC, in partnership with the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication, together we've been collecting data on what Americans think about climate change, the risks they perceive, the policies they support and oppose, the behaviors they're taking, and we've been tracking these views twice a year, typically in the spring and the fall, doing large nationally representative polls. And what I want to talk about today is this question of, is there a finite pool of worry regarding climate change and COVID? In other words, as the pandemic has taken up more and more of our shelf space in our brains for dealing with the general worries of life, from our finances to our work to our interpersonal relationships to everything else we all have to think about and care about every day. Since the pandemic has taken over so much of our lives, is there any worry left to go around? Has concern about climate change declined as concern about the pandemic has increased? And the way I'm going to approach this is through the tracking of opinions regarding 5 key ideas that many climate communicators track. These 5 ideas serve as sort of the foundation of many conversations and questions that we all have about climate change. And so we're going to look at where the public is in terms of these 5 key ideas and how that's changed in our most recent survey. So the 5 key ideas are: 1, that it's real. The planet is warming. It's warmed 1 degree Celsius, almost 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the past century. And number 2, it's bad. Those aren't just increasing temperatures, but increasing temperatures mean that the heat wave season, for example, was 3 weeks in the 1960s. It's now 10 weeks long. The area burned by wildfires out west a few decades ago, it was about half what it is today. So it's doubled in size. Wildfires are much larger today than they used to be, in part because of climate change and warming temperatures. But it's not just warming temperatures, it's changing precipitation patterns that are also bad for us, because it means that the strongest, most intense hurricanes are increasing in frequency today. We have more flooding, and that list goes on and on. So number 3, it's us. We know what's causing the problem. We know what's causing these terrible consequences, and it's human activities. It's the burning of fossil fuels. It's the combustion of coal, oil, and gas. Number 4, scientists agree. Overwhelmingly, 97% of scientists have looked at the evidence and been convinced by it. And number 5, critically, there's hope, meaning we know what the tools are to reduce the risks and solve many of these problems. So where do Americans stand on these 5 key ideas, and how has that changed since the pandemic started? Well, back in 2009, 71% of Americans said they believed that global warming was happening, so they thought that global warming was happening. That number dropped to 57% in 2010, and it's been slowly inching its way back up ever since. This decline here has been studied in depth because a lot of things happened at that time that might have explained it, including the Great Recession, the financial collapse, including a lot of extreme cold weather events, including a scandal of climate scientists, ClimateGate, which some of you know about. And it was a substantial decline in thinking that global warming was real. But it turns out that the most detailed analysis shows that it wasn't any of those factors. In fact, it was actually a change in political elite, what they call elite cues. In other words, what politicians were saying and doing. And in particular, this drop was driven by basically the real birth and sort of expansion of the Tea Party, a deepening of the political divide in American society at that time. So how about the second idea, that it's bad? Well, those views have taken a similar kind of path. They were fairly high in 2008, November 2008. They dropped in early 2010, and then they've been slowly bouncing back up ever since. Bouncing meaning there's a little bit of noise from year to year, but gradually increasing. Today we're at 66% of Americans, so 2/3 are worried about the impacts, either somewhat or very worried. About a quarter are very worried. And there is this, a little bit of noise from survey to survey. The errors here are plus or minus 3 percentage points for all of our surveys, which are nationally representative. How about the third idea? It's us. Well, 62% think global warming is mostly human caused. And again, this trend, and these, I should have said before, but I'll say it now, these most recent data were taken after the pandemic started. So these data are from April 2020, and the pandemic was well underway by that point. It really started in the winter, January, February. So March, April, and the numbers had not declined, at least as of April. So 62%, almost 2/3, were saying that they think global warming is mostly human caused. The number who disagreed and thought that it was mostly a natural change continued to decline a little bit. The fourth idea, that there's a very strong scientific consensus, it also hasn't changed. This is not a time series now. This is a snapshot in time, but this is from April 2020, and it's very consistent with our prior data. It shows that when you ask Americans how strong is the scientific consensus, or how many scientists, what percentage of scientists agree that human-caused global warming is happening, only 1 out of 5 on average will say that they think that most scientists agree. And this is a big misperception that needs to be corrected, because the correct answer is that 97%, at least over 90% of scientists agree that climate change is real, that it's caused by human activities like burning fossil fuels, and yet only 21% of Americans understand that fact. If we do look at the changing perception of the scientific consensus over time, we see that at least when aggregated to the state level, there is a strong upward trend. And this is very encouraging. This includes data from April 2020. Again, we're not seeing any downturn in understanding of the scientific consensus. It's at least moving in the right direction, even though many people still perceive debate and uncertainty where there just is none. So the fifth idea, how about there's hope? Well, there is hope, and this is one of the figures that gives me hope personally, because it shows that not all Americans, but Democrats in blue and independents in gray are really changing their priorities, and climate change is moving very quickly to the top. Those other graphs I showed you of changing views over time, they were all relatively flat. You could see that opinion is just, it's very resilient and robust to change. It doesn't really change easily. But when we look at priorities, which in many ways is the most important thing to look at, how people rank these issues, Democrats are changing their priorities, and global warming is increasing dramatically. Back from 15% or 20%, 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, it's now 48% of Democrats say that global warming should be a very high priority for the president and Congress. Democrats are also increasing. Maybe the pandemic affected this number here a bit, the 23%, because there was quite a downturn, but also this number is a bit surprisingly large too, so unclear. But the independents are relatively small compared to the just the size of the number of people represented by the orange and the blue lines here. So giving you a little bit more detail about prioritization, you can see that global warming ranked number 2 for the first time in history among liberal Democrats. This is totally unprecedented. global warming for year after year by our survey data, Pew, Gallup, any large polling organization, global warming is always ranked near the bottom across political parties. And it has really kind of skyrocketed to the top. It's number 2 for liberal Democrats. It's number 8 for moderate Dems. It's number 23 for moderate Republicans, and it's dead last for conservative Republicans. So this highlights the extreme polarization of this issue, the political polarization, but it also is a sign that, at least for many Americans, they're taking this issue incredibly seriously now, much more than they were in the past. And another reason for hope is that when you drill down to actual policy items, we actually find more support among Republicans than you would guess based on that prioritization. These policies are not a high priority for Republicans, but nonetheless, they support them, at least in theory, when they answer these questions. And so funding more research into renewables, generating renewable energy on public lands, providing tax rebates for electric vehicles or solar panels. In all these cases, you get strong majority support, even among the most conservative Republicans. And it's not until you start talking about regulation that those numbers start to drop among conservative Republicans. So widespread bipartisan support for moving away from fossil fuels and shifting towards clean energy. So the political lens is not the only lens to look at this issue through, because in fact, many people do not make decisions solely based on politics when it comes to what they do in their lives, what they talk about. They're not always using this political lens, and that's important to remember. And so we actually identify 6 different groups among the American public, ranging from the dismissive, who think it's not even happening, to the alarmed, who are convinced it is happening. It's a serious risk, and they want to engage the issue, and they support policies designed to reduce the risk. And these 2 groups, the concerned, also support policy, but they don't consider it quite as urgent an issue as the alarmed. That's the difference between these 2. But by and large, over half the American public now falls into either the alarmed or the concerned groups. And when you look at how those groups are shifting over time, again, including data from April 2020 after the pandemic started, the alarmed have more than doubled in size. They've increased 15 percentage points in the past 5 years, and we're not really seeing much of a slowdown in this despite COVID at all. We do have a little bit of data that was collected after April. So these maps are based on data collected in August and September. So the pandemic was certainly well underway at this point. And we asked people about the news that they wanted to hear about. What did they want from the news media? And overwhelmingly, Americans want to hear more news about actions being taken in their local community in response to global warming. What are people doing to reduce the risk? There's a great thirst for this information. Strong majorities in every county across the United States want more information and want the media to do a better job of covering climate change. 79% say they're interested in news stories about actions being taken by the US government in response to global warming. And again, these data are from September. So we don't see evidence based on these data for the finite pool of worry idea. In fact, it appears that people can be concerned and caring about the pandemic, and they can also be concerned and caring and prioritizing climate change as well. And I think that many Americans understand this issue is not going away, it's not getting better, and that there are things we can do and need to be doing to reduce the risk. So just to wrap it up here, climate concern has not slowed as far as we can tell based on our data. Many Americans still underestimate other people's concerns about climate change. The scientific consensus was just one example of that. And third, that you can help address this misperception gap by speaking out, by talking about climate change with your family and friends, by helping people understand that they're not alone in their concern and worry, and by pointing them to resources and places where they can find more information about solutions, and just talking about what they're doing, what needs to be done. The more we talk about this issue, the more people will prioritize it, and the more traction we can get on reducing the risks. So there are some resources here. You can sign up for our email list, of course. You can visit yaleclimateconnections.org. There are hundreds and hundreds of stories, very short stories, just 90 seconds in many cases of the radio stories that provide information about what people are doing about this issue in their local communities. And you can contact me. Thanks for listening.